Okay, good morning, everyone. Yasher Koach to Tzvi Wolf for today's sponsorship. What is it in honor of?
Trump's. Yeah, well, I was going to say Mayor and Shayna's recent anniversary.
Okay, in honor of Mayor and Shayna's recent anniversary.
Your anniversary was last week.
And Tzvi and Sharon's anniversary. Mazel Tov. Many more years of happiness together. I have to say that when you made your daughter's wedding and you were up there together, it was beautiful to see the back and forth, the banter and the love that you have for each other. It's beautiful to see. And I'm sure that Mayor also, I didn't see you guys. Okay. So, I figured we should talk about some of the halachos of the war, although I planned this before. It always works that way with things going on in Israel. It's a very fluid situation. But at the end of the day, even though we are excited about the recent events of the U.S. Taking out some of the nuclear plants in Iran, we still don't know what is coming, and that is what my relative... it's interesting that I have a relative in Toronto, or now he's no longer, but in Toronto, but my wife is like distant cousins or second cousin, I don't remember exactly, with Kalman Weber. So he's my connection to Israel. He lives in Efrat, and Kalman said he's okay, but like we all are wondering what lies ahead. So everyone's still very nervous. There's still people going into shelters at night. People are extremely sleep deprived, and that's the people who are not on the front lines. But we still have many soldiers on the front lines. So I figured to give a shir a little bit about the topic, the life and the particular moment that we're in right now would be appropriate. So there's many shilas that come up in the bomb shelters, but I figured I'd pick one. And one would be Shabbos. Can I carry my phone on Shabbos? Because why would I be carrying my phone? So first of all, just to get a little bit of a picture of what people are going through. So everyone's getting, notices. Either they're getting the sirens. There's different kinds of sirens. There's the pre-siren siren, and then there's a real 90 seconds and get into a bomb shelter. But also there's an app that you can get on your phone if you have a smartphone that has alerts, and you could be notified if there's going to be. Sometimes you even have a few hours in advance if you have one of these phones, because the way that the ballistic missiles work. This is my understanding of it, but certainly if anyone has more information, go ahead and offer it. I believe they go into outer space and they enter back into the atmosphere. That's how they can go such far distances. So they have different kinds of ballistic missiles, but some of them you have 2 hours about approximation based on the Israeli intelligence, and their technology can see. They don't exactly know where it's going to come back into the atmosphere, but they can basically estimate when it's going to come back. But then the other problem is you have, it's not a problem, it's a bracha, but we have the Iron Dome technology. But when and if they get a direct hit, then you have debris. So the debris could be falling in different places. Even if the destination of the missile was some other place, they don't always know where the debris is going to be falling. So that's another problem. So either way, it's really important to have the alerts on your phone if you're living in Israel under a threat of these missiles. So the question is, on Shabbos, do I have to carry? Do I have to carry my phone in order to be able to get these missile red alert warnings? So here I'm going to draw on another shir that I gave a few months ago when we discussed going into shul on Shabbos with a gun. So at the time we discussed this. We discussed it from a issue of muktzah, which we'll also take that vantage point this time, because we're going to assume right now that you're in an area that has an eruv. If you're in an area which does not have an eruv, so then if it's a situation of pikuach nefesh, anything goes, as we mentioned many times. But if it's a case of, let's say potential future risk, that's a different discussion. But generally speaking, it's much more problematic when you don't have an eruv. But if you're on the front lines and you're in the army or you're fighting, that's a whole different set of questions. So we're going to focus on the civilian. We're going to focus in an area which has an eruv, or in a private domain itself, like a home or an apartment building, without getting into the Erev Chatzeros issues, but you're in an area which does not need an Erev, and you carry with other items. So are you allowed to use your phone, are you allowed to carry your phone with you? You know, obviously using your phone is not okay, but are you allowed to carry your phone with you on Shabbos? So we're sort of just skip a lot of the preliminary steps because there's a lot to cover from a Tefillah and a Torah perspective that I'd like to get to. Just to get to starting from the launching pad of the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch, launching pad I guess is not the right, the springboard or whatever, the first point of takeoff, I don't know. But either way, source number 1 is in the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim Shin Ches Siv Gimel, where the Shulchan Aruch delineates different kinds of muktzah. So there's really different kinds of muktzah. And the muktzah that we want to focus on today is a kli shemalachto le'isr. A kli shemalachto le'isr is what you would categorize an iPhone or a smartphone. It is an item that is used that its main function is to be used in an prohibited or not permissible fashion on Shabbos. In other words, you can't use a phone on Shabbos, so therefore maybe its status would be considered muktzah because of its normal usage, which you can't use on Shabbos. In that case, the Shulchan Aruch writes, mutter lataltalo, like a pen, for example. A pen's main function, although you could stir your coffee with it, but its main function is to write, and writing is forbidden. So that would be considered a classic kli shemalachto le'isr, and you are not allowed to generally touch it or move it. And he says you're allowed to, bein letzorech gufo, whether you need it for its own purpose, kegon korna shel zahavim, zihuvim, I think that's how you pronounce it, o nefachim lavtsoa boegozim. You can take this, let's say you want to, maybe it's zahavim, because it's kornos shel zahavim is like a goldsmith's type of axe or hammer, a hammer of a goldsmith, or a blacksmith's hammer to crack a gozim, that you're allowed to move. Let's say if you need to use it for a mutter purpose, which would be cracking nuts. So in other words, usually, and we've been discussing this on Thursday nights in our Halachos Muktzah Shir. So the hammer, korna shel zahavim, or nefachim, the hammer of the blacksmith, the goldsmith, or the blacksmith, you can use to crack a nut. Even though the normal usage of the hammer is forbidden on Shabbos, to, I guess, hammer out gold or other types of metals, but to make and create something, that's prohibited. But you're allowed to crack the nuts on it, with it. What about a different type of moving? It's called tzorach mekomo. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, if it's tzorach mekomo, dahainu shetzorach lishtamish b'makom shakli munach sham, if you need the place that the kli, the vessel, was placed on there to use, in that case, mutter lo litol misham, ulahanicho be'ezeh makom sheyirtzeh. You're allowed to move the item from one place to another, and you can put it down wherever you would like. But to move it from the sun to the shade, the hainu she'enu minadned, she'enu tzarach l'taltalo el b'bnei she'ira she'yishbor o yigonev sham aser. To move it from the shade to the sun, from the sun to the shade, which in other words, there's a concern for its own well-being. In other words, I don't want it to be stolen or broken, then I'm not allowed to move it. So if I care about the pen, it's my sentimental, fountain pen, whatever it is, I really don't want the pen to be stolen, then I can't move it. But if I need this place where the pen is, or I need to use the pen to stir my coffee or whatever, which is allowed, you're allowed to move it. So the question is, what is the status of an iPhone on Shabbos? Another type of muktzah, by the way, is something which is muktzah machmas chisar and kiss. Something which is very expensive, and it's a person is very makbid. He's very particular about who uses it and who doesn't use it. And that would be a little bit more stringent, and you can't move it l'tzarach makomo or l'tzarach gufo. You can't move it if you need the space or to use it for a mitzvah purpose. So before we get to the phone, we have to first discuss, which is what we discussed last time, the original topic before we get to phones was guns, weapons. So I heard this from actually a Talmud of Rav Hutner, or someone who was very close with Rav Hutner. His name is Mark Engel. And he said that Rav Hutner once came back very upset. He came back from Eretz Yisrael to Brooklyn, and he was very upset because Rav Goren at the time said that a soldier can carry a weapon on Shabbos because of kivush haaretz, conquering the land. And Rav Hutner said, it has nothing to do with conquering the land, but rather it's because of pikuach nefesh. It's because it's dangerous, and therefore that's the heter. But either way, it appears that many poskim allow soldiers to carry weapons. The question is, what about a citizen who has a gun license? We're not getting into rogue, people just deciding to carry. But assuming that they have a license to carry, what about not during times of war, or a soldier who's off duty? What about them on Shabbos? So we could make the argument, just to put it, plug it back into the Shulchan Aruch and the parameters which we just discussed. You could say that a gun is a kli shemalachto le'isser, because firing a gun is havara, it's making a fire. And that's forbidden on Shabbos. It's also potentially something that could create a chabura, it could create a wound. And that's forbidden on Shabbos. Or kill. And that's also forbidden on Shabbos. Thank you, Gabi. Shochet is forbidden on Shabbos. And therefore, it's a kli shemalachto le'isser. All right. But you could also make the argument that it's a kli shemalachto leheter. It's actually for a mutter purpose. Why? Because any time you're going to be firing the weapon, if you're an Orthodox Jew on Shabbos, is if it's a sakana, if it's dangerous. You're not just firing the weapon, you're not going hunting, you're not just firing for practice, you're actually protecting people. So you could say, it has nothing to do with muktzah, this is not like a pen, this is like a butter knife or something, because that's a mutter, you're allowed to fire a weapon. You're actually required to fire the weapon if it's a pikuach nefesh situation, if it's a dangerous, life-threatening situation. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which, by the way, it's interesting, none of the poskim that I found, at least, categorized the gun as a muksa machmas chisar and kiss, which is interesting. I didn't find anyone who says that it's, you may say that it is. I didn't find anyone who addresses that question. The Orcha Shabbos does say it's considered muksa machmas chisar and kiss in a place where it's not a sakana. But I imagine the only time you're going to be carrying a weapon is when it's a sakana. Just to skip a little bit ahead, just to sort of put that aside for a moment, that's in source number 4, Orcha Shabbos Chelik Beis Amid Lamed Gimel. So he does say, Kli neshek hanimtza b'makom she'ein bo chashash sakana gam lo mishtamshim bo lehasra'ah ela mutzna ba'aron. You should put it in a box because dino kimuksa machmas chisarin kis v'asul tatul afatzar kuf makomo. So it should be put in a safe or a safe place when it's not a sakana. But we're not really dealing with that right now because we're dealing with, when we're going to apply to the phone situation, we're dealing with a potential sakana. So it's interesting that he brings that up, because I would think it would always be a muksa machamas chisar and kiss, because it's something that you are very careful of who uses it. You have a hakpada, and then you have heterim. But it seems to be many of the poskim, as we'll soon see, categorize the gun as a kli, as a kli shemalachtu le'isser, as we soon shall see. So in the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa Parachav Hal Ara Chav Tes and Chav Hey, in some versions it's other notes because there's different versions, but they quote Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach as follows. This is the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa was written by a Talmud, a student of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and they quote Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach as saying the following. Source number 2: Lo itiru L'taltel kli shemalach l'isser kidei lemnoa hazik otsar o lichsos chametz. As we mentioned before in the Shulchan Aruch, you're not allowed to move a kli shemalach l'isser to prevent damage or pain. So this is a little bit further than we're saying, but it's similar. We're not allowed to move it for its own usages. That's what the Shulchan Aruch said. And he's saying also, like you're not allowed to cover over chametz, you're not allowed to do preventative things with a kli shemalach l'isser. Preventative of damage, preventative of tsar. And then I'm skipping a little bit ahead. Mikol makom nireh dirovev akdach, which is a rifle and a pistol. Kedei lahatil bahem ema, in order to instill in others fear. In other words, it's not a outright sakana. No one's holding someone up at gunpoint, and you know, or an enemy is trying to infiltrate a yishuv. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about stam. You're carrying a gun. Why you carry a gun? Because you want there to people to see that you're carrying, and that's instilling fear. It's instilling a deterrence for a future potential attack. Shapir chashiv kitzorach gufo. That's as if you're using it for a purpose. It's like taking the pen that you left on the table and you want to stir your coffee with it. That's a mutter purpose. You're using the item for instilling fear as a deterrent. He says, even though this is not normal, it's not the main usage. It's logical to say that at a time where it's not a time of war, rov tashmisham rak lahatriya. The main purpose of it is a deterrent. Now, he says this based on a sefer which I have not yet found myself. I'm assuming that it exists, but I have not found it. He bases himself on a yam yisaschar. Now, why does he have to base himself on the yam yisaschar? Because there are poskim, including seems to be a Magen Avram and others, that have a question on this, and they say, let's say you have a ner dolak, dolek, you have a burning flame, and it's burning the kovach beis haknesses. He says, I'm sorry, a ner she'ena dolek, a candle which is not being lit. The kovach haknesses tinok lebeis haknesses lo chashuv tzarach gufo kivad she'ena osebo klum. Maybe a typo over here. Tilton ner she'ena dolek. Why are you moving the candle? Oh, I understand what he's saying. He's saying, let's say, bringing a child or something like that, or a candle which is not lit, doesn't serve any purpose. So you're not allowed to bring that in because it's not doing anything. So maybe you could argue that you're not using it in any way. So it's not providing you with any tzorech gufo. And therefore, maybe the same would apply to the gun, because the gun is not functioning in any, I'm not using it, people see it and then it's being used in that way, but it's not a tangible usage. Maybe that's the problem. But he says, no, the Yam Yisaskar says that using something, even though it's not a tangible usage, is considered a tzorach gufa. And what's the proof he gives? The proof is, the Yam Yisaskar writes, the mutter lichvotz kli shemalach tol Israel ner k'dei lahatir tashu shamita. Kol zeh shamati me hagoner shel mazalman orbach satzal. The Yam Yisaskar gives other examples, taking tefillin outside of a room, covering a ner. So what is this talking about? If a person wants to have relations, if a couple wants to have relations, the halacha is they're not supposed to do it in front of tefillin or svarim, and they're also supposed to be a darker area. So if there's a light that's shining, and all you have, I don't know exactly what you would have, a kli shemalach to l'isser. Can't think of a good example, but let's say, I don't know, something that you use for a malacha, you're allowed to move that and put that, hopefully in a safe way, to block the light in order to allow the couple to have relations. Or you're allowed to move the tefillin out of the room. Tefillin or muktzah. How are you allowed to move the tefillin out of the room? Because it's tzarach gufo. What? I don't need to use the tefillin. I actually want the tefillin out of the room. That's okay. That's considered enough, according to the Yam Yisaskar, enough of a reason to move it It's considered tzorach gufo. So the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is quoted as saying, if you can cover a fire with a kli shel malachta l'isser, which means it's not providing you any tangible usage on its own, it's covering a fire which allows you to do something else, that would be enough to say that the gun, even though I'm not using the gun, it's not like I'm taking the pistol and smashing nuts with it. That's I think what he's saying with the Ner Dolak and the Tinok to the Beis HaKnesses. I'm not using the child. I'm not doing anything with the unlit candle, but I am providing something that we consider to be usage, and that is deterrence. So that's enough of a reason to say that I can move the gun I could carry the gun on Shabbos, even if I don't have a particular reason why I'm using it, other than the fact that it instills fear in those who see it. Interestingly enough, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's son, neither of them are living any longer, I believe, Rav Shmuel Auerbach, disagrees. And he says that he actually disagrees with a different point. Some other places, the Orcha Shabbos quotes Rav Shlomo Zalman as saying that the gun is a kli shel malachta leheter, like I mentioned to you before, that you use it only for mutter purposes. And that Rav Shlomo Zalman's son, Rav Shmuel Auerbach, disagreed with him, and he says it's still considered a kli shel malachta leisser. Either way, it's not such a difference because, as I mentioned before, you're allowed to move it in times of need, and that is in fact what Rav Yashiv writes in source number 5 in Kovitz Chuvos, Rav Yashiv Chilek Gimel Simin Nun Aleph. He says, this is a question he was asked by Shomrei Ha'ir, Latzeis B'Shabbos B'Chizayin. The Shomrim, are they allowed to carry a weapon? So he says about a place that has no Erev, it's a problem. But in a place that has an Erev, Chizayin, Rak Isser Muksa Machmas Isser. L'tzarach Gufa Mutu Taltel. V'shomer hanosei klizayin sha'ayidei zeh mafchidim mimenu havilei l'tzarach gufo. He says it straight out. In order to instill fear in those who are seeing it, that is enough of a tzarach gufo, and therefore, even if it's a kli shel malachta l'isser, it's considered mutter to move it for its own usage. So let's take that and apply it to a phone. A phone, you can use a phone for forbidden usages. At most, it's probably, according to most, midrabanan. Whatever it is, it's LED, it's certain things. So we don't use our phones on Shabbos, but most likely it's a midrabanan. But there's also mutter ways to use your phone on Shabbos. You could use it, in theory, depending on your screen settings, but in theory you could use it for a clock. You could use it as an alarm clock. Although the iPhone, the alarm doesn't go off ever. I don't know why. It's really annoying.
There's a way to do it.
There's a way to do it.
I can find that.
Okay, I have an alarm app that I use on my phone. Shabbos alarm app.
There's a Shabbos alarm that does go off.
Yeah.
Turn off.
Whatever it is, you're allowed to use. You actually are allowed, according to many poskim, you're allowed to use your phone for certain purposes. So if that's the case, I heard this from Rabbi Yitzchak Breidowitz on the Halacha Headlines podcast recently. He said, many poskim say it's a kli shel malachta leisser, a phone is kli shel malachta leisser. Maybe some would argue and say it's a muksamach mas chisar and kiss, because maybe you wouldn't give it to a child to play with, but it seems to be that many say it's a kli shel malachta leisser, and therefore it can be used for a mutter purpose, and therefore, what would be a mutter purpose for using it? Carrying it around for your clock. And so you carry it around for your clock is viable as a viable reason to use it, and that therefore one could carry their phone on them also in order to be aware of the red alerts that will come to your phone automatically. You're allowed to carry your phone if you're living in Israel during a time where there are missiles that are being fired at you. You're allowed to carry your phone. You're not allowed to use your phone, but you're allowed to carry your phone. You can look at your phone to see. You can't change the settings of the screen, but you could see what time it is depending on your settings. And therefore, you can also have it in your pocket in order to get the red alerts.
Assuming you can only look at it for the clock if the clock is on.
Yeah, that's a different question. But I'm saying because you could use it for a mutter purpose, so many poskim say it's considered tzorach gufo to use it for the purposes of getting the red alerts, or for the purposes of seeing what time it is. I don't necessarily recommend it because it's very easy to use it improperly, but if in a situation like this, where you need to make sure that you know about the red alerts, then it makes a lot of sense. There are people, apparently, there are communities that they'll inform the people like through other means, like Hatzalah will go through the streets with loudspeakers because not everyone is going to have a phone, right? And if you're going to know it otherwise, if let's say you designate one person who's going to have it and he'll let everybody know. There are different cheshbonos, but just as a blanket rule, I think it's certainly room to be lenient to allow someone to carry their phone to make sure that they hear of a red alert. People want to know, can I leave my computer on? Can I leave my television on, my radio on? Again, that's a different discussion because there it's a more of like a zilzal of Shabbos just to have your radio on, in the house. That's a different question. But just in terms of the particular shaila of having a phone on you, I think that there's room to be lenient.
In Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, there are people who want to say, well, I should carry my phone all the time, every Shabbos, because who knows? I don't think we're at that point, but there are certain communities probably, I don't know, let's say in Europe or other places that people will carry certain things on them. Maybe they carry phones, maybe they have beepers. I don't know how they do it, but there's a strong, high security in certain places. So every place has to be judged, in terms of the danger that is there, and every place is a case by case. But I heard Rabbi Yitzchak Breidowitz, so I feel like I could share his psak with you, that he allowed people to carry their phones, again, assuming that they are not using their phone, their phone is set to beep or whatever, alert them, or buzz or whatever it is, when there's a red alert. I think that's pretty much I don't know if it's a consensus, but it's very, I think, a reliable source to rely upon. And I think it's also the same reason that Rabbi Elyashiv and others allowed people to carry weapons for this purpose of deterrence. Questions?
I mean, you're also potentially using the phone if you have to call for emergency. So that's different. Like, there isn't an alternative. There are other alternatives if you're just looking for red alerts. There's something called silent wave now that they've had, which essentially you turn your radio on, you leave your radio on, and it is
okay.
So that the
Okay, that's a different story.
Now,
yeah.
So that basically it's dead, it's silent, and only
unless
if
there's
there
something
are alerts, then it broadcasts. And so for someone, specifically for those who are Shamash, but that
yes.
So they can get the alerts.
That's a great idea.
They don't necessarily have to have phones now. If you're only using it
well, let's say I'm going
purpose,
to shul or whatever. There's different communities are functioning differently. Some communities, all the shuls are shut down. Some other communities, they have safe rooms and they go into them and they daven there. Other communities, they're open. I'm not saying what the right thing is, but I think some people maybe feel, I want to be safer. And even though, I don't know, I can imagine for weeks and weeks, it's hard to be shut down in a safe room. Maybe they want to go to a friend's house for Shabbos. So they want to, and they're walking there. They want to know, as we're going, we want to have our phone on us so we know, if we have to go to the safe room, that they're not in. It's anywhere I go, I know I'm going to be alerted. That's sort of where the assumption, where the shaila starts. Where you're right. If you stay in a specific place that has a radio, what was it called? Silent wave. Then that's great. But let's say you're on the road or you're in your car and whatever it is, you want to make sure. I guess you shouldn't be in your car on Shabbos, but. So whatever, you're out and you're walking and you want to know, can you have your phone on you? So that seems to be the psak. Wow, I see that took me longer to get through that, but it's okay. Well, now we have a little bit of time. Let's just go through a few things in terms of tefillah and in terms of learning. So first of all, we should know there's a debate between the Rambam and the Ramban about the mitzvah of tefillah. Is there a mitzvah aseh? Is there a din from the Torah, biblical commandment to daven? So the Rambam says yes, once a day. Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah Aleph, source number 6, mitzvah aseh lehispal b'chol yom. There's a mitzvah to daven every day. The Ramban disagrees with this, and the Ramban says in Sefer is Hasagos on Sefer HaMitzvos, mitzvah chamishi, this 5th mitzvah. He says no, there's no mitzvah to daven every day, but he does say perhaps it could be a mitzvah min haTorah he says, matzio min hatzaros, during a time of eis tzaros, time of tremendous challenge and pain, then there would be a mitzvah saseh to daven. Interesting, sort of as an aside, Rav Soloveitchik is quoted a number of places as saying that really the Ramban, who says Be'is Torah there's a mitzvah saseh, and the Rambam, who says only once a day, he says really it could be that there's not such a big debate between them. Because Rav Soloveitchik said that the Rambam fundamentally agrees with Ramban. This is in source number 9, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein quoting the Rav. Indeed, tefillah is obligatory only in times of trouble, but the Rambam perceives man as existing in a perpetual state of crisis. Were it not for God, he could not exist for a single moment. And there could be no greater trouble imaginable than a person who is, heaven forfend, disconnected from God. Hence, we may deduce that the individual is in a constant state of crisis and needs God's contact and His mercy every day. So that's a very interesting idea that I think we all sort of feel in a greater acuteness now. But really, Rav Soloveitchik is saying that once a day at least, according to the Rambam, a person could feel, I need to touch base with Hashem, I need to touch base with my Creator, I need to reaffirm that relationship because I cannot exist without Hashem, and therefore I'm almost like at a perpetual crisis. But we're living in a time of crisis, and therefore to daven for Klal Yisrael, what the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tanios, to daven, to cry out, to blow the chatzotzos, which is what last week's parsha was. The blowing of the chatzotzos during the time of the trumpets, during the time of war, was what we did, and that many Mefarshim say that also applies to a tefillah of prayer and to cry out to Hashem to protect us during time of war. This is also brought in the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam in, as I mentioned, Hilchos Tanios. I think we're familiar with that. I wanted to just touch for the last few minutes of the shir, touch on the role of Torah study, the role of Talmud Torah, which Baruch Hashem, everyone here, we're engaged in, and we can do more, and we can encourage others as well. How does Torah study help? We hear this a lot. I even heard Sivan Rachav Meir, also in the same podcast episode. Really fascinating, because she was saying things that I heard maybe from different, Rosh Yeshivas and people learning in yeshivas, that the Torah protects, but she was saying the same thing, that the Torah protects, and we need everyone to be learning and davening, and we need all the protection. I think it was recorded before the recent events, but at the same time, we still don't know what the future lies, what lies in the future. So interestingly, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tefillah that Talmud Torah, mitzvahs Talmud Torah, gedola mi mitzvahs Tefillah. Study of Torah is greater than the mitzvah of Tefillah. Now, I don't think it really means that we shouldn't do one over the other. I think we're just saying both are extremely important, and at some times the emphasis is on tefillah, and that's often in a shul. But we should know that Talmud Torah is also extremely important. And in Parshas Bechukosai, we're told of the impending potential tochacha, the things that could happen if we don't listen to Hashem, and we also are told of things that would happen when we do listen. And what are the specific things? Rashi, the Torah says, if you listen to my mitzvos, and he said, right, in pasuk Vav, source number 14, v'nasati shalom ba'aretz, and I will bring peace to your land, ushachavtem, and you will lie down, ve'in macharid, and you won't be afraid that you're going to be woken up from a siren. And he says in pasuk Zayin, uredaftem es oivechem, v'nafvu lefnechem l'chorev, you will pursue your enemies and they will fall before you by the sword. Now, what does this mean in Bechukosai Telichu? So Rashi says, everything else is covered. Mitzvosai Tishmoru, keep the mitzvos. Vasisim osam, you do them. So what is Bechukosai Telichu? Rashi says, Amelim Batorah, to study Torah. So it follows from Rashi that if we want to make sure that the Jewish people have peace in their land, and are fighting their enemies and chasing them, and then the enemy falling in front of them. And Rashi says the way that we prevent the opposite from occurring is to be studying Torah. So it follows that the study of Torah contributes to the battle against the enemy. Not to say that it's like a vending machine. You put in 5 minutes of Torah, you get 5 missiles. It doesn't always work that way, but we certainly see that there's a element of Talmud Torah that leads to or contributes to peace in our land. We also see this in Masechet Sota, Daf Chaf Aleph, where it says certain mitzvahs provide protection while you're doing the mitzvah. lefisha, but Torah, source number 16, af Torah megana la'olam. Torah protects forever. And other sources about Talmud Torah also say bein be'idna da'azikba or bein be'idna da'lo azikba, magna umatzla. A person who is involved in Torah, whether they're engaged in it in that moment or not, Torah protects them. Rava disagrees, and Rava says only when you're involved in it. But either way, we see that Talmud Torah is a critical piece to the puzzle of protection. Another part of the Iron Dome of protection. And finally, just to share like one or two sources on a third element, we have using your seichel, which is common sense, which, as Mark Twain said, ain't so common. Bring your phone with you. Then we have Tefillah. Then we have Talmud Torah. And now I want to mention a last thing which I think is critical, is Achdus. Achdus in a time of distress, at a time of difficulty, we have to come together. In the Tehillim, Kuf Lamed Gimel, which was turned into a song, so we know the words pretty well. Hine ma tovu ma noyim sheves achim gam yachad. How wonderful it is, how beautiful and pleasant it is for brothers to sit together. Rashi says, on that pasuk in Tehillim, that once Hashem sees that brothers coming together and being like brothers should, getting along, gam hu yachid imam. Then Hashem also, the one who is, Yachid, the one who is one, he is also with them. In other words, when Hashem sees his children getting along, and he wants to be part of it. But like a parent, lahavdil, or the mashal, I should say, when a parent sees their children fighting, it's one of the most difficult and painful things. And the parent doesn't want to be part of that. But when the kids are getting along, then the parent wants to be engaged in that. And that's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu the same way. When he sees Klal Yisrael fighting, the infighting, and the fractures, and all of the baseless hatred, that's when he says, I can't really, it's just, I can't be involved in that. So, we have to remember, Sheves Achim Gam Yachad, we're all brothers. If Hashem is our father, then we are all brothers and sisters. And the Arizal writes, I'm just going a little bit off the source sheet, but the Arizal writes that the Jewish people are a keguf echad, like one body, kolol me'evarim rabim, that is comprised of different limbs. This is actually in the source sheet on the Medrash, but I'll just summarize it. The Medrash says that the Jewish people are like a sheep. Just like a sheep, if you hit the head, it hurts the whole the sheep. So too, when Klal Yisrael, when one element of Klal Yisrael sins, we all feel it. We're all in this together. And in fact, I don't know if this is where it comes from, but there's a phrase, we're all in the same boat. The Medrash in source number 19, Vayikra Rabbah, Daled Vav, it actually says, Mashal b'nei Adam shayu yoshvim b'sfina. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Ben Yochai says, if we're all traveling on a boat, notel echa mehem mikadeach v'hiskal kodeach tachtov. Some bright fellow starts to take a drill, start drilling a hole in the boat. Amru lo chaverav. His friends say to him, what are you doing? Mata yoshevosa. What in the world are you doing? Amru lahem mach bat laechem. What do you care? Lo tachtai ani kodeach. I'm not drilling a hole under your seat. I'm just drilling a hole under my seat. Amrulo shehamayim olu mitzabim alinu es hasfina. You're when you drilling a hole in our ship, we're all going to die. So what are you doing? So this is the same idea that we're all literally in the same boat. Actually, I shouldn't say literally, figuratively, but we're all in the same boat. In the mashal, it means that we all should care about both the physical well-being, the spiritual well-being. We should care for our brothers and our sisters, and we have to do the best that we can to connect and to meet people where they're at. I see that the hour is getting late. I'll just share with you one final. I guess I don't know the first place I saw this, but people say that Tzibor is Rosh Tevos Tzadik, Beinoni, Rishayim or Rasha. That's the Tzibor. You have everybody, right? You always got in a big group of Jews, you got everybody. So we all have to care for the Tzibor. As the Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva, if a porish midarchei Tzibor, ein chiluk ulam haba, if a person separates from the Tzibor, you don't have a chiluk ulam haba. Everyone has a taina, everyone has a claim. Oh, this guy did something wrong, that person that, they don't keep Shabbos, they don't do this, they're not that. At the end of the day, this is our Tzibor, this is our Klal Yisrael, and we need to remember that we're in the same boat, and that we should make sure to come together, especially during times of trouble and struggle. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to do so this past Thursday night with an incredible gathering. I think, 700, 800 people, I don't know exactly, coming together to daven for Klal Yisrael. And we should continue to be practical. Sometimes you need to protect yourself. We should continue to daven, continue to learn, but also continue to be one, to focus on the good, to recognize that no one's perfect, but we're all in the same boat. And we can't drill any holes, even if we're only drill. I'm just drilling a hole in one part of the boat. No, this is our whole boat. We're all in the same boat, and we will drown if, God forbid, if the boat goes down. So we should. That seems to be a pretty negative place to end this year. May we see Yeshuos. May we be get through from the boat from one from the point A to point B, and may we hopefully see the end of this war very, very soon, and that hopefully this new occurrence of the U.S. getting involved will help finish it, will end the war, and create a more peaceful future for the Jewish people in Israel and outside. Okay, have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.